So hello. So hello and good afternoon again. My name is Lisa Reed. I'm the Chief Learning Officer for the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. We also have Sarah Easley, who's working with us behind the scenes, helping us monitor the chat and technology. So we're really happy to have you join us today for our data-driven success, leveraging analytics and AI to thrive. This is in partnership with Miller and Mitchell Turnbow with CLA. A little bit about the center for those of you who are not familiar. Our mission is to educate, connect, and advocate for North Carolina nonprofits. It's important to the center to assist nonprofits to build organizational practices that address the nonprofit leadership gap while also lifting up equity, diversity, and inclusion in all nonprofits. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Today's webinar will be recorded and a wraparound email, including the recording, and will be sent later in the week. You may also use the chat box for questions. And also at the end will also be, hopefully you'll stick around and please fill out our post-session survey evaluation. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Appreciate the introduction and excited for everybody to be able to join us today. Like Lisa said, the topic of the day is data-driven success, what that means in terms of leveraging analytics and AI for your nonprofit organization to thrive. So throughout the presentation today, please feel free to push questions into the chat. We'll try to address them as Jordan and I go through everything. We've got quite a bit of content. It ranges from high level strategic insights around how to use technology down to some actually more technical deep dives. So at any point, if I say a term or a three-letter phrase that doesn't quite resonate with you, feel free to stop me and double down and double click on anything that seems like you'd want a better or more in-depth explanation. But before we get started, I thought maybe Jordan and I could do some introductions. Jordan, if you want to start,
Yeah,
and maybe give just a quick highlight of CLA during the
that'd be
introduction.
great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Miller. I've been with CLA for over 14 years now. My specialty is not digital and developing cool analytics and dashboards. That's why we have Mitch here to join us. I primarily specialize in assurance services, so audit review, single audits, things like that. But I work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. I'm based out of the Charlotte office. Charlotte, North Carolina office, but serve nonprofits across the state and even the Southeast region. CLA is a professional services firm. We actually serve over 12,000 nonprofits nationwide in a variety of different capacities. I will say, working with clients that have digital strategies and use technology is very exciting to see and see how they're using that and how they can gain efficiencies in their organization. I work with a wide variety of nonprofits. I have some that are still, manually reconciling things. And I just think about how they can utilize some of these strategies to help make their processes and procedures more efficient. So I'm glad Mitch is here to tell us how we can help utilize those tools. And it doesn't have to be super robust. Even little changes and little tweaks can help take the organization pretty far. So Mitch, anything I missed in my introduction?
No, that was spot on. I think a lot of the folks on the call who may be familiar with CLA may be less familiar with the technology side of what we do. So excited to bring that perspective. Jordan, I know you and I have these type of conversations quite often. We just had one in Charlotte not but 2 weeks ago. We'll be in Raleigh in a couple of weeks doing the same thing. So excited to bring it to the webinar and be able to hit a broader audience all at once, talking about what it means to be a data-driven organization and to have a digital strategy. And before we get into the nuts and bolts, I think the best thing that we can do is actually we have to do this part real quick. I'll leave this up while we talk. Before we get into the actual nuts and bolts, I think the best thing we want to do to start is kind of cover what it is we hope the folks on the call are able to get out of the conversation today. So just at a high level, what do those learning objectives looks like? If at any point during the conversation, if we're 30 minutes in and we haven't hit at least a couple of these, hopefully somebody in the chat can ping me and tell me, hey, you told me we were going to learn this. So let's take a step back and go back and through. But the idea today is, one, hopefully organizations that are joining today are able to take a step back and just identify how important a data strategy is, not just to, the future of their operations, but being able to actually execute things in the short term as well. The idea that you'll be able to recall how to streamline your data processes for greater efficiency, recognize the importance of integrated data systems, this idea that you'll be able to recall how to leverage advanced analytics to make informed decisions, and identify techniques to transform your data to actually make these things happen. So hopefully by the end of the session here, you all are feeling like you're on the right path to at least a few of these things. Before we get started, what I want to do is make sure that we kind of set the base for what are we talking about when we talk about digital. At CLA, we try to keep things simple, at least as simply as we can to start. And our vision for what digital is starts with this idea of sort of these 3 columns, 3 buckets, 3 tiers of the work that we do. On one side, we talk about platforms. Platforms are all the technology that you would consider your technology stack, your technology ecosystem. The majority of organizations that we work with start their technology strategy with the platforms that they have in place today. We find it very rare that we're starting with, a new group. We work with a lot of established organizations. So when we walk in to help from a digital perspective, often what we're doing is diagnosing the situation as it stands, which involves the tools and platforms that they're subscribed to or have in-house. The second column, which is the majority of what our conversation today is going to be focused around, is this idea of data, right? So data is the information and the insights. It's the information that's stored in these platforms. It's also the components that underlie a lot of the work that you're all doing, the actual ability to execute things in the platforms, pull the information down, and then leverage that information for insight. And then the third bucket, which is all important and is something that we keep in top of mind in every conversation we have and every solution that we implement, is cybersecurity. We like to think of cybersecurity not as just another column, but actually the umbrella that sits over the top of all the work that we do. And I think a big question that we always ask organizations is, what is it that's pulling you all away from your mission? What's the thing that's preventing the people who came to work from you from being able to execute the reason that they came to work there in the first place? And how can we use technology and digital strategies to get everybody away from manual processes, duplicate data entry, searching through Excel sheets, to actually get back to the mission at hand and really start focusing on the reason you all started to work in these places in the first place? A couple things we want to think about when we're doing digital transformation broadly. When CLA and hopefully the partners that you all go to market with from a technology perspective are doing digital transformation, we don't want to just think about the technology that I listed out. We want to make sure that we take into consideration the people who will be working on that technology and the processes that the technology supports. It's this 3 tiers, the 3 sides of the triangle, the 3 legs of the stool. They all have to be stood up at the same time. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is the idea of the technology in its more pure sense, the platforms and data structures that you put in place. The one thing we don't want to forget about is how that technology affects the people who are using it and the processes that they're trying to accomplish with it. And you got to make sure that when you're doing these things, you've got all 3 of those things taken into consideration. And when we're working with these organizations, where we often start is this idea of a digital maturity curve and trying to determine where your organization is on the digital maturity curve. And this is one of the questions I always ask you, Jordan, when we're in the room together, to say, and we'll maybe take a quick second here, and folks on the call can take a step back and think about, where is your organization on a digital maturity curve like this? And where are you personally? And what I will do is put up some cheats here so that you can actually have a look at some of the things that CLA has done with organizations to help them sort of move up the digital maturity curve. So as you take a peek, I'd love for some folks who are on the call today to maybe pop into the chat, where do you put yourself on the digital maturity curve? And maybe Jordan, you could contribute and kind of think about personally, where are you and where do you consider CLA as we think about what we do in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a large amount of different systems and processes that we use at CLA. So I think that we are Probably between strategic and advanced. We do use some AI tools within CLA in a secure environment, and that has been so helpful for me personally. Like instead of searching for 10 minutes on our intranet for something, I can go to our AI tool and it will help direct me to where I need to go. But on the other hand, we are using, if there are any other auditors on the call, we're using this system called ProFX. And honestly, I think any day it's just gonna like collapse or like go away. Now we're in the process of like developing our own, and we're like kind of halfway there, but we're still using this technology that has been around for a long time for auditors. So that's why I say maybe not all the way advanced, but I think there are things within CLA that are advanced, but there's probably still some things that need to get caught up.
Yeah, it's interesting. The conversations we have around the use of a tool like this always involves, we're somewhere between coasting and pedaling steadily. And then as soon as we feel like we're gaining speed, the technology shifts and we're right back in the middle of the curve here. And that's the nature of what we're working with. The technology ecosystem is constantly changing and evolving. What I think is important for folks who are sitting in their organization and recognizing that maybe themselves personally, either in their work life, but personally in what they do at home and how they actually operate and use technology, who consider themselves sort of in the top half of this curve, but their organization may be sitting somewhere in the bottom half. There's a little bit of an onus on you, whether you're a leader or in the day-to-day of the organization, to start to push your organization to make these changes and recognize the value of what's happening. What I like is when we're in the room and we're identifying folks who say, I'm in the top half of this, my organization's in the bottom, and here's the things that I'm doing this week to try to drag the organization up the maturity curve with me. And here's why we're engaging the partners to do things just like that. So going forward, one of the key components of not just the digital maturity curve, but the digital maturity curve as it pertains to all the different aspects of technology that we can take into consideration is the topic of the day, and that's data. And when we think about data, one of the challenges for organizations who may consider themselves in the training wheels or learning to ride is that what they have a hard time doing is actually organizing what the objectives of that data might be. So if we make these changes, what are we actually trying to accomplish by making the changes? And we were reviewing some poll data the other day and looking through some insights that we had gathered and pulled off to bring to another client. And there was the idea of, what are you actually trying to work on? What are the things you're trying to change? And the majority of the folks that we talked to are somewhere in the top of this category. And I'll review through some of the information that we were able to pull down. But this idea of being able to improve the operating systems, not just to create more efficiency, but actually to reduce costs. A lot of folks said improve accessibility to our services to a more broad range of audiences, which is one of the ones that I like the most, especially as it pertains to the nonprofit organizations that you and I work with, Jordan, is how do we expand the mission? Enable more digital engagement with donors, members, researchers, employees, and other stakeholders. So this idea that if we implement these data strategies and we think about how we can actually do more work with data, what are some of the ripple effects of that insight? How do we have better contact with our donors and garner more respect from them? How are we treating our members more effectively? But also this idea of taking into consideration our employees and how this transformation affects our employees and makes it easier to do their job and makes it more exciting for them to show up at work every day. And the last one, sort of in the top half of this, is actually to improve the delivery of the mission and programs in the services. Make that mission more effective, make those services out there in the marketplace resonate the way that we know they're possible, the reason the organization put them together in the first place. I thought this data was super interesting relative to what are we trying to do when we make these changes. Any comment there, Jordan?
I would just say, thinking about how integrating systems or implementing some of these strategies can help make the organization more efficient, and what can you do with that extra time, right? So some of my clients spend a lot of time doing manual reconciliations. They export information from one system, they manipulate it, and then they import it into another system. And that takes time and effort and energy. And is that the most exciting use of that person's time? Probably not, right? So how can we, how can that process be more efficient, more automated so that individuals within the organization can spend more time delivering mission or spend more time researching new grants to apply for or spending more time, out in the community, spreading the word about what you're doing, right? So thinking not so much as, I guess, thinking about what can be gained from implementing some of these digital strategies or these systems and processes.
No, it's perfect, and a good leeway into what it was I wanted to cover next, which is to do a more. Now we've kind of got a framework of what we've been talking about, maybe a more baseline understanding of the different terminology that we might be using. I want to do a little more of a technical deep dive into the topic of the day, which is this idea of data. So I want to talk about, to start, this term that we use quite often, which is the idea of data silos. And we've listed up four of the most common types of data that we work with when we're helping nonprofits make this transformation. And feel free to pump into the chat, any other type of data that you all are working with and are feeling challenged to bring together to actually make it valuable and insightful. But when we're thinking about the data silos and how that middle column of the digital ecosystem that we talked about plays with the left one, which was the platforms, right? And what that ends up doing, and it seems like over the last 5 or 10 years, nonprofits specifically have been inundated with all of these different platforms, all these different subscription model SaaS tools that they could bring into their technology stack with a good vision of what they're actually trying to accomplish. A lot of them have fantastic functionality and perform tasks in a really strong way. But what ended up happening is we resulted in all these different data silos. So if you don't have the proper strategy for what to do with your data as it pertains to your technology ecosystem, you end up with a Razor's Edge and a Salesforce and Donor Perfect containing your Dota data. And then you have Apricot and Caseworthy and Sumac holding on your program data. Oops, sorry. And your financial data is over there, locked up in Financial Edge or QuickBooks or Intact. And you have your people data in ADP and your volunteer data over here in Volunteer Hub. And you've got this web of technologies all with their own sets of data. The idea is, how do we actually take that information and combine it together to start really making changes that would be more insightful? Breaking down data silos and integrating that data allows you to gain this holistic view of the organization. So what this does is it leads to real better decision making, improved operational efficiency, stronger stakeholder relationships. I want us to think about some ways that each area can benefit when the data is brought together. So can you truly understand the cost of fundraising by connecting donation revenue to campaign expenses, right? It's very difficult to run a report in one system and another and think that information is correct. So do you actually, as an organization, have the ability to identify the donor return on investment by tracking how much donor contributes versus the cost of acquiring and retaining them? Could you really see which grants and restricted funds align with the specific programs to ensure the compliance? Are you able, as an organization right now, to automate financial reconciliation between CRM and accounting systems, actually trying to reduce errors? And if we think about this idea of those data silos, combining program and financial data, right? If we actually are able to bring those into a similar place and exercise insight off the two of them together, now you're able to actually ensure that your programs are properly funded, and you're able to demonstrate that impact back to your funders. So you could track things like cost per program outcome, right? How much does it cost to serve one individual participant, and extrapolate that up to your goals for the year? You're able to actually link funding sources to specific programs, ensure that proper grant compliance and reporting. This idea that an organization could identify underfunded or overfunded programs and adjust budget allocations accordingly, or forecast program costs far in the future using just the base of the spending trends from the last 2 years. These are all things that are possible once you have that unified data strategy. One of my favorites is to think about this idea of combining that people and volunteer data with the program data, right? These are two that are very commonly siloed apart just because of the nature of the platforms that we use to garner them. But if we bring them together, we can actually think about improving staff and volunteer efficiency and enhancing the service delivery at the same time. So you're able to track which volunteers contribute the most impact. You can recognize your top performers. You can identify staffing gaps in programs and then forecast your hiring needs out 3, 6, 9 months, a year. You're able to optimize volunteer scheduling based on program demands, ensure staff and volunteers are properly trained and certified for the roles so you can actually make sure you're compliant. Once you're able to determine the true cost of these things, you're able to understand a little more what it means when you have a unified data strategy. So you're able to actually integrate these data silos. And then nonprofits are now able to reduce those inefficiency, improve transparency. And at the end of the day, what we've been talking about and saying over and over again, actually maximize the impact. And I believe a lot of folks on this call have probably heard some of these promises before. And what I was hoping to be able to do is give, even if just at the lightest level, sort of a 3-step vision for how to accomplish this. And it's tough because, in my opinion, we're often caught in this space where we're leveraging technology and then putting it in place and not recognizing the full benefit of it. And we all talk about the big promises, but I want to try to pin that down into 3 ways that you all could take away some of this and actually go execute a few things. So step 1, this idea of assessing and align your data needs. This is where you really need to understand what you have and what's needed. This is one of those imperatives that we use that digital maturity curve for, right? To sit down in front of the organization and say, let's be really realistic about where we are. One of the ways we can help do that, or one of the ways we've helped organizations go through this, is doing what's called conducting a data audit. So we're going to identify, where are the data silos? Where's the donor, the program, the financial information currently residing? Is everything all in separate systems? Are we pulling some things off of spreadsheets? Do we still have manual handwritten records in some situations? How are we executing AP and all of these different things? How do we actually do these things? Where's the information contained today? Now once you have an understanding of where everything is, you want to map the organizational goals to the data needs. So define the key insights that are needed for fundraising, define the program evaluation, define financial planning and workforce management as it pertains to not just the goals of the organization, but what the data that you need in order to execute those things. And then identify the gaps. So actually recognize the gaps, determine the pain points, find inefficiencies that are caused by the silo data, find the inconsistent reporting, find that lack of real-time visibility, go through the exercise of actually identifying those gaps and quantifying those pain points. And then just evaluate the need. If it's multiple systems to hold the data, assess whether it's a centralized data warehouse or something more like a unified reporting suite. Once you're able to go through this exercise of assessing and aligning, hopefully what you have coming out of that is the roadmap for breaking down those. And this is oftentimes where it's important to consider incorporating a technology partner into the work. And this is where you need to automate and integrate those data systems. So you're building a connected data ecosystem. It's this idea of connecting a data warehouse. You find a centralized donor, program, financial, and people data, in a cloud-based warehouse, something like Snowflake, Google, Microsoft Azure, something like that. Decide how these different systems are actually going to extract data from the sources, right? So whether that's ETL processes or APIs that are automated, you want to make sure you've got a good vision for what your integration systems looks like. How are you pulling the information from one system to the other and pulling that all down into the data warehouse so you're able to break those silos down? Once you're able to actually get that implementation and integration, now becomes, in our opinion, what's the hard part. If you've leveraged a good technology partner, you've gone through the exercise of setting the strategy for how you're going to accomplish these things, then it becomes time to actually leverage the insights. And what we often find is that organizations go through these big technology exercises, and at the end of the day, they don't see the real value from it. So what they call it is a failed technology exercise. But what really was maybe a lack of change management on the organization and the partner side to say, if we're going to go through the effort of building this big connected ecosystem, we also have to make sure that we're going to start using it and making the changes, pulling the people along with us to make sure that that information is being built out and then utilized in an impactful way. Some other tools you can incorporate toward the end of this for data visualization to make things easier on people, tools like Power BI and Tableau, making sure that you're leveraging the embedded reporting functionality and the tools that you're already using. Some of the fundraising data, financial health, all of that can be pulled from the systems and visualized in the systems that you have in place, but also then recognize that you can bring it together and see that in one place if you have the right system in place. And once you have that, start leveraging that real-time insight to track the donor trends, to identify the funding gaps, and really understand the program inefficiencies. In order to really take on what I think is now our new favorite buzzword of the year, the last couple of years of AI, it's these strategies that need to be put in place ahead of time. Jordan, you've heard me say it before. There's kind of 3 steps into our opinion of how you step into leveraging AI as an organization. Step 1, take advantage of the tools that you have in place. Flip on the AI features that exist in the platforms that are already part of your ecosystem. Step 2 is combining the data from that ecosystem into a centralized place. That's what we're talking about right here. So if you really want to become an organization that's a leader and able to leverage the tools like artificial intelligence, having these strategies put in place first means that you're going to be able to put direct AI tools at a clean data set and actually leverage that to do that sort of predictive and analytical insights that we think organizations need in order to foster a more successful future. These data-driven nonprofit organizations are where you're going to find, your most impactful leaders. You're going to be able to garner, more of the funds and the things that you need in order to execute the mission that you have in place. This type of approach, this 3-step approach: assess and align, implement and integrate, leverage the insights. This is the type of approach that we think nonprofits are starting to understand a little more impactfully. And are actually starting to put in place. But as is often we find with nonprofits, it's the technology that's dragging them forward versus the opposite. So how do we ensure that these organizations and help folks, get on their toes and be out there doing this impactful work? Anything to add there, Jordan? That was a lot of the technical deep dive, but I wanted to make sure we covered some things on a more technical basis today.
I guess I was going to ask you a question because, if we go through the first 2 steps here, assess and align and implement and integrate, if it doesn't get utilized, if we're not, if the organizations are not empowering their people to utilize the technology and the systems, then you're right. It's going to be a quote unquote failed technology, right? So how, and that's I don't know, like we've done this presentation, I've sat through some presentations with you before, and it's almost like the data part is the easy part. Like getting your arms around what data is needed, why we need it, and things like that. That's the easy part. It's the people part that is the most difficult part. So what have you seen, or, what helps organizations get the people part empowered and actually using the systems and the technology that's there?
Yeah, I think there's 2 pieces of it. One, making sure that you identify a partner that has that as top of mind. And there's a component to it that what I like that you said is like the data is the easy part. Part of the reason the data is the easy part is because that's developed over time, right? The challenges that we're talking about still exist, but the technology that can be used to fix it has gotten easier and easier to implement over time. A lot more of the organizations we're partnering with have in-house data teams that do a ton of this work. So we're really there helping set the strategy, helping facilitate these changes. And then if you have the right partner in place, you can hand over the reins for a lot of the technical work that may not be the expertise of the organization. It's at the end of the day, like you're saying, once it's in place, we've got a group of people. How do we make sure that they're empowered to use the tool? That empowerment starts at the very beginning of the process. During that assess and align, bringing your organization to the table to go through the exercise of understanding the pain more specifically. I was on a call with an organization just this last week, and one of the people that kind of chimed in and said, we've got all these tools. They didn't fix any of the problems that we thought they were going to. They basically said, we had a bunch of different tools dropped on us and all these new strategies, and we never had the opportunity to contribute what our actually challenges were. So now we just have more tools. The challenges are the same, but now we got more things to do. So we're more overwhelmed than we were. They didn't have the opportunity to contribute to what it was that they would actually want the organizations to change. And my favorite example of this is a leader that we're working with. One of our clients has actually brought us to the table to conduct a series of interviews, virtual interviews with different groups of their finance department to say, help bring about some of the ideas of the things that we should change. And that leader's first instinct was to have us go talk to the sort of the hands on keyboards, the folks doing the day in and day out work, which I just had a ton of respect for, because now as we go through, we're going to garner these ideas that's going to help us draw that very clear and defined roadmap for what the future state looks like. And it's going to be done so with the insights from the folks who are actually struggling with those things. So bringing people along from the beginning, giving people the opportunity to volunteer for, work groups who are focused on, identifying these challenges and then being part of these implementations. There's another story that we had of an organization that we brought together to sort of walk through the outputs of a strategy session. And in that session, it was just post-COVID, just a couple of years ago. It was more than likely a lot of these young employees' first time sitting in a boardroom. So we had everybody together, and we had 20 of us in a boardroom, and it ranged from the executive directors of the organization down to some folks who had only been with the organization for a year or two, and it was their first job out of college. And I loved looking around and seeing these young folks and new people new to the organization's kind of eyes light up like, oh yeah, we're here at the table making things happen. And to see folks who are able to bring those leaders to the table in combination with the folks who are actually executing the work was really fantastic. I think it's exactly to your point. One thing we always like to do is talk about sort of the big picture, but maybe get a little bit too light on the technical side of things. So again, to apologize for any folks who are hoping that this was going to be a big strategy session and then, got caught up here in the last 15 to 20 minutes of real technical insight. But we often feel like we're leaving folks without anything tactical to go execute. So what I wanted to do is even double click, if we scroll back up one slide, into that middle section, because that middle section is the real challenge. I believe there's a lot of strategic leaders on this call that could probably handle this idea of assessing and organizing and aligning their organization together on a challenge. And there's probably a ton of you out there that can even try to leverage those insights and bring that information to the table. But it's that middle section there that I want to double click on. And it's because this is the real technical work. This is the things that I think some of you may be surprised about when the time comes to engage a partner to actually execute these work. So what I want to think about is, how do we do this implement and integration phase? I'm going to just give 3 sort of highlight bullet points of the things that we do as an organization to make these things real. It's not the be all end all of how to implement a strategy, but just some stuff that I think would be relevant. So you're not hearing that terminology for the first time when you go out into the ecosystem to either bring a partner to the table or leverage a new platform. But this idea of establishing a data warehouse as the central hub, creating a unified data foundation. So you want to make sure that you're choosing the right data warehouse. And I mentioned these in the last section too. Selecting a scalable cloud-based solution. So some examples: Snowflake, Google, Microsoft Azure. You want to make sure that these are built to support nonprofit needs, and that the organizations that you're working with have a vision for how to help nonprofits specifically. You want to make sure that the warehouse that you choose is compatible with some of the existing systems you have in place, especially those that you've established as being long-term strategic partners for yourselves. Now, if during that assess and align, you realize that we need a new GL system, we need a new volunteer system, those aren't going to be your priorities as you think about how do you determine you're aligning with your data warehouse. But if you've defined a long-term strategy for a few of these enterprise systems, you want to make sure that the warehouse you put in place has a good compatibility. The next, this idea of defining the data model and the structure. So map out your key data points, make sure you understand which of those are going to be stored in the warehouse. So whether that's donor history, campaign success rates, grant allocation, volunteers hours, make sure that those things are mapped out and you're able to help your partner actually understand what it is that's important to you. Don't just rely on them for all the information. Make sure you're providing that back in an effective way. You want to establish standardized data formats. Again, if this is something that your organization is capable of doing alone, that's fantastic. If not, make sure you have a good understanding of what it is your partner's doing with this terminology in mind, the standardized data format. This is going to reduce inconsistencies between the different systems. It's going to also set you up for scaled success in the future. You want to make sure you're utilizing, ETL tools, exchange, transfer, and load tools. If that's necessary, based on the state of the raw data and the systems that you need to make sure that the organization is bringing in clean data into the warehouse. Garbage in, garbage out is a terminology that everyone hears. It applies more wholly here than it does in other places. You want to make sure that you're bringing good, clean information into your data warehouse so that when you're leveraging the insights that come out of it, you're doing so off of what you know is consistent and accurate. The idea here on this last piece of it is implementing the governance strategies. So you want to make sure that at some point during that phase, you've talked with your partner that you're putting to work here, this idea of data governance. You want to have a really good framework for how to do that. You want to assign data stewards as part of the organization who are going to be responsible for maintaining that accuracy. We often find that when we're going through analysis of the projects like this, there's a certain point at which the organization should be bringing in real data folks to work internally. If you're going to be a data-driven organization, it means you need to have some people on staff who are able to do this, so you don't have to constantly be leveraging outside resources for help here. Having a point where you bring in chief data officer or a data scientist as part of your organization is a challenge. And you want to make sure when you're talking about, we're going to put this big sophisticated ecosystem in place, at what point are we going to actually need somebody in-house to help us maintain those things? Make sure the organizations you're working with to execute are able to provide you that insight, so you're not stuck with a bunch of technical debt and no one in a place to actually execute the work on it. You want to make sure that you're in compliant with all the regulations that are specific to your organization. And you want to make sure that you implement security measures. So you want to be in line with GDPR and HIPAA, if that's applicable to your organization, nonprofit financial and reporting standards. All of these things are to be taken into consideration somewhere in between that, strategic initiative and the actual implementation and integration of the data warehouse. Any comments there, Jordan? Any questions we have pop up in the chat, or anything that you think I would want to maybe be a little more clear on?
Well, as you mentioned in our introduction, we had a session in Charlotte, a similar session in Charlotte a couple of weeks ago. And one of the questions that came up was like, related more towards cybersecurity, not necessarily the data specific piece, but more about, why would anyone want to try to hack into our system? We're a nonprofit, like we don't have that much money. We're a nonprofit. Why would anyone want to even try to get access to our systems or our data? So what are your thoughts on that, Mitch?
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of spectrum of, you've got bad actors, and in the area of where a bad actor can actually focus their time, there's the high volume, high potential area. Those modern times now, they're often covered with the highest levels of security. So as that bad actor makes a designation of where do they want to spend their time accessing information and trying to perform their bad acts, that grade has slowly been moved in this direction. So as the organizations that we're talking about, it's like, we don't need these things in place. All of a sudden you become a high priority target because of that very mindset. Most of the time when you're watching old movies, you see bank robbers are robbing banks, right? They're doing this because all the cash is here at the bank. Well, I think banks realized that they were the prime targets. You don't hear about that as often anymore. You often hear about, the problems happening at a much smaller and local level. It's because the barrier to entry is much lower. So as you think about your organization, if you're not taking these proper cybersecurity measures into place, you're identifying yourself as a potential target. And bad actors are realizing that there's more potential in being able to access these places with limited security versus trying to go through the challenge of tackling the organization who's got the most sophisticated cybersecurity in place. So we put a poll question up. We'll see how folks are thinking about it. That I always use those 4 data silos as examples because I think there's a lot of synergy between our ability to break them down and some of the potential outputs of them. But I'm curious, for anybody that's on the call, we take a quick minute here if we wanted to decide if there's anything we missed. What either your organization's kind of most difficulty accessing information, or if there's an area that we didn't even take into consideration. What are some of the things that we may have not even considered? I'm seeing a lot of the program information pop up as one of the ones that they're being most challenged with accessing and leveraging the information on. That's interesting. I saw one person popped E in there that we didn't think about one. I'd be curious to know which one we didn't tackle. I'm not saying that I'm wrong. I'm just always interested what might go in there. Interesting. Suzanne said, we have so many different programs, and all of those different programs use databases. So now we're talking about not just the data silo of programs, but silo data inside of the program data. ability to actually understand the long-term impact. That's interesting. Well, what I want to do now is maybe take a step to the side and talk about one of the case studies. Talk about a case study, an example that we actually helped an organization with, that we kind of walked through the steps that we were talking about and saw some of the real impact of what it was. So I'm gonna go through this and hopefully this resonates with you all as in terms of our ability to take these challenges and really turn them into something. So often I hear there's no way that my organization could do this. You're talking about things that aren't relevant to me. Like I can't even imagine our group implementing a strategy like this. And I totally understand the challenge there. It's been one of the most satisfying things I've gotten to do since coming to work at CLA, is actually getting over that hump and starting to implement these real solutions and seeing the results of it. And this is one of the use cases that we lean back to all the time because it just resonates so well, and it's such a perfect example of what happens when we have the opportunity to sit down and go through it. So this is really an organization that's based here in Indianapolis, which is another reason I like it so much. It's a hometown group for me. Before the pandemic, the organization was kind of operating off of a little bit of a smaller budget by comparison. Still serving a ton of clients, but there was the pandemic that came about, and it brought about this need for challenge, which is also one thing that we hadn't talked about much, but there's always these pivot points inside of organizations to say, what's our reason to change? And oftentimes there's something like a pandemic or an external event that forces that change, kind of puts the organizations back against the wall and says, you got to fight your way out of this thing. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. What we're trying to help with more often now is how do we get people on their toes without being forced back against the wall, right? So how can we make these changes without, some external force forcing it upon them? But when we started working with this organization, this is kind of the current state. And we did exactly what we talked about. We walked into the approach, and that first bucket of what we were talking about is, getting aligned and assessing the situation as it stands. So we did an in-depth analysis to try to understand the distinct challenges and really assess the opportunities. And then we built up that digital strategy with them. So we helped the organization understand, what does it mean to have a digital strategy? We identified the different potentials that they have and the different things that we wanted to actually align on. And then we decided we're gonna really dig into advanced tools with this group. And we are, at the end of the day, leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, but we knew we couldn't do that without implementing those data-driven strategies that we talked about before. So for this organization, we implemented, several key data-driven strategies that were data warehouse. We had real-time dashboards that came into play, broad system integrations. We used these tools to centralize data storage, improve accessibility to the data, and provide insight across all the different departments. This allowed Gleaners to make more informed decisions and streamline their operations. One of the most significant improvements was actually this idea of operational efficiency. And it's difficult to quantify a lot of this, but the thing that we talked about the most is how do you actually bring the organization to a point where the folks who are doing the day-to-day activities, the employees of the organization, feel like they're empowered to do the work. And this is one of the biggest outputs of this, is that the data that we are providing, the ability to move information around from one place to the other, made it exciting for folks to come to work because they knew that they were going to be able to go out and accomplish the mission and serve the community that they worked in. One of the other posts that we would consider maybe a secondary effect of the work that we did here is this idea of boosting the donor engagement. It wasn't necessarily one of the key targets as far as the outputs of the project that we had done, but what we were able to do as a result of having the information available was improve stakeholder engagement immensely. We were able to bring analytics together, and then the organization was actually able to go out and do personalized outreach, which supported the fundraising efforts using the data that we had in place. There's data that all existed. It just needed to be tied together and then brought about in a way that was actually functional. Let's see if I can shift this one forward. So here's some of the actual measurable impact that we were able to determine on the community. So it went from serving 300 households to over 2,100, all out of the same location. So it wasn't an expansion of different locations. It was really about serving out of a single spot. We, as a result of our ability to bring more programs, more effective programs to light, the operational budget tripled over this time, and that has continued to grow since then. And we went from this limited decision-making ability to fully comprehensive is the one thing that we always like to talk about with this. So I think the question I have is, as we think about the different type of things that we're bringing to bear for our organizations, right? We're talking about predictive analytics, community empowerment, integrating IoT in this situation was actually super interesting. And then this continuous innovation, building a scalable ecosystem, leveraging tools that have the ability to actually change with the time and develop more effectively as the organization grows. It's this idea of a future-ready platform or scaling for tomorrow's needs. And the question we like to ask as we go through this is, keep bringing it up. Do you feel, as you folks on the call, do you feel your organization is actually ready for this type of work? Give you guys a second. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Actually pump it in the chat, but thinking about this, is your organization ready to do this? And then the big question that we ask as a result of that, what do you actually need in order to make it happen? Is it just the initiative? Are you all thinking about these things? But what do you actually need to make these things happen? And what we like to talk about is this precipice to instigate change. Here are some things we want to give. These are what we consider the hard takeaways from today's content. If you have these things in place, that's where we think you're pretty much good with square one and ready to sort of move in to square two of the process of actually implementing some of these solutions, right? Can you step back as an organization and say, we have a current state map, which means we can actually map out all the technologies we use and how those things are tied together and how the data flows from an inbound donation out to the program on the other side and track the value of that all along the way. You have a future state map. Do you have a vision for what this organization is going to be in 5 years? And compared to the current state, what the future state needs to look like in order to accomplish those goals? Have you done something like a use case feasibility study to say, we've got all these different challenges that we're trying to hit? What are the value of actually accomplishing some of those challenges, is actually achieving some of these things? How can we prioritize our initiatives based on that return on investment? And then the digital roadmap. If we're going to get to this future state, and we're here on the current state, how do we bridge that gap, leveraging something like the use case feasibility study to actually build a programmatic vision for how to go forward? And just to give you all some examples of what some of those things look like, the use case prioritization matrix could look something like this, where you use a simple Foursquare, where the highest return on the investment is up and to the right? So the feasibility of being able to do something, how realistic is it that we're actually able to put this in place? And what's the value of doing it? High feasibility, high value, those are the projects that you should execute as quickly as possible. That means you're going to recognize the return on the investment, and it should be very easy to make a case to the board, to outside investors for why we are actually taking on this technology project. A couple examples of what a current state process diagram or a current state map looks like versus a future state map. What you'll notice is in the future state maps, everything's condensed and really efficient and on top of itself. That's good. That's the type of map that you hope you're going to be able to draw for your organization at some point. Future state is this idea that this is what we're going to need in order to accomplish the things that we know are our goals. You can state this type of design for 3 months from now, 6 months from now. We find it very impactful for organizations to say they have an 18-month rolling future state map, addressed quarterly or every 6 months, to say this is what we know we're going to be 18 months from today. And then do you have a technical roadmap for execution with real months and timelines put into place to say, here's the value of the tool that we've done. That's that use case feasibility study, the value of the tool we decided to execute on, and here's our execution map. This is actually how we're going to get there. So with that, what I would want to ask is if anybody has any questions for us, or if there's anything, we've got another 12 to 10 minutes left on the time we've asked for you to join today. So if there's any questions in the chat, happy to sort of walk through our vision of those things. Otherwise, I think Jordan, you and I may have some questions we can ask back and forth based on what we've heard in the past.
Not seeing any questions in the chat yet, Mitch.
All right.
I know one of the things that when I'm talking with my clients, they know that there's more they can be doing and more automation and more tools that they can be utilizing. But the biggest barrier I think that they see is, the cost, the price of some of these tools or getting the resources that they need. So what have you seen, Mitch, in terms of like helping the organization overcome that barrier or see, past that barrier?
Yeah, I think the challenge for us is we've got to get over that hump very early in the conversation. So, because if you're not able to actually visualize the ability to execute the project, it limits your willingness to even think about it. So we want to get there very quickly. And two of the things we say very often are, if you think about your plan for the year and how you're allocating budget to that plan, right? So that's often broken down in around now, everybody's starting to actually execute the plans that they put in place toward the end of last year, the beginning of this year. You've got all these different bullet points of the things that the organization's going to accomplish. And for too long, technology has just been another bullet point or even an afterthought, right? To say, we're going to do a big CRM implementation or we're going to do something with data. And it's kind of just a bullet point at the end of the big year plan. What we like to talk about is implementing technology at every step of that plan, thinking about how can the technology be a component of the budget that we've allocated to accomplish that. Because at the end of the day, you should have a marker in your organization to say every technology implementation we do results in this amount of return. And if it's done properly, that will always be a positive return. So when it's time to allocate the budget, that positive return should instinctively be a part of the plan every single time. It shouldn't be an afterthought or something that you do as an individual line item. It should be, how do we enhance the mission right now? How do we do this bullet point better with technology? The other piece of it that's a little more, in the moment and when you need it is if you're able to run some of these calculations and some of this, you're actually able to take those use case feasibility studies and take those roadmaps and go out and raise money specifically for those endeavors. We're seeing that more and more often with the clients that we're working on. When you bring a visionary leader to the table, somebody who has a vision for what the organization is going to be, and you combine that with actual hard data, all of a sudden it's really easy to go say, let's go raise $100,000 to execute this project, because we know at the end of the day we're going to be able to stand up and say this is the impact that we're going to make as a result. It ends up becoming much more aligned with the mission, and you can go raise money specifically to the engagements. It's what some of the outputs of these really help organizations define for themselves.
I find too, like the cost of doing, like, can you measure the cost of doing things the same versus innovating and automating? So, Mitch, you and I are working with an organization. I think they said they spend 40 hours a month manually allocating salaries and benefits for their various different grants. And if that could be automated, that could take, I don't know, two hours a month. So what is the cost of continuing to do that, spend 40 hours a month doing that, whereas that person could be redeployed to applying for grants or, researching grants or being more strategic about, oh, this person has capacity, let's put them on this program. What's the benefit or the cost of doing the things the same versus freeing up additional time and how they can utilize that time.
Yeah, it's a comment that's on the first slide of this presentation, because it's how do we get people back to the mission? There's something like 25% of daily job tasks were not in the initial description of the person who came in onboarded, right? That it wasn't contained there, not because they were trying to trick people, but because the manual overload of the work that we're trying to do is just becoming more and more cumbersome over time, and it just kind of gets shifted out into the organization because there is no return on doing manual work. Right. So instead of actually taking the initiative to hire somebody in to do that, you try to shift it out to the point that becomes too cumbersome, and then you outsource it or you do something like that. It's one of the biggest positive effects of doing that use case feasibility study in a way that determines here's the real impact, to say this is what it's costing us today. This is what the cost of nothing is, and this is what it's going to cost us to change it in the future and the benefit we're going to get back from it. That's a great point. There's a couple of questions I saw in the chat that I thought were really interesting. One of them said, we're ready for the process, but we get stuck trying to figure out what kind of system would combine data into one system. Any thoughts? Yeah, so this is where one of those strategic engagements, in my opinion, comes into place really quickly, right? If you've gone through the exercise and you can confidently say that you have, assessed and aligned on what it is, you should be able to bring that information out into the marketplace and ask for help. So technology partners, CLA is one of those. There's tons of local partners too. If you're an organization who prefers to work with, if you're a little bit smaller and you want somebody who's kind of sitting there in your geo, like North Carolina, for instance, we've got offices across the state. CLA is a great partner to kind of execute those strategic engagements. You can also go directly to the technology partner. So we mentioned a couple in this call. Google, Amazon, Microsoft all have technology that's designed exactly to do that. And if you've got a good set of requirements that you can bring to them, they're going to have, a vision for how to help you execute those things. But what's important is to have that information ready and available and not be at the behest of what they're asking you for, but actually leaning into them and saying, this is what we need, and forcing them to bring to the table a solution that fits your need. That's both for the platforms and the technology partners you decide to align with. See what other ones I thought were interesting in here. Any existing programs designed for nonprofits to achieve better insights? Blackbaud is something that I've seen seems to achieve this. I think we listed off a few platforms in the early stages of this, and I could go back and make sure I say my list, and we're going to share the slides with you all so you can go back and read through it. But most of the major platforms in the ecosystem are trying to do a better job of breaking down the silos. What you have to as an organization decide is you want to lean in to one platform. It's called an enterprise technology strategy, where you say this platform we're going to leverage all the tools inside of its ecosystem to say these are the things that we're going to do, and we're going to sort of shift our processes to match the processes that the system was designed to function on. The other side of that strategy would be to do what's called a best in breed. When you do a best in breed approach, you want to identify the best donor database, the best GL system, the best human resources platform that's fit for your organization. And that's where the imperative for making sure you've got good designations on the integrations that you need and where the data flows. So if you're using an enterprise system, it can be a little bit simpler in the short term to have the insights, but then you're at the behest of that organization for what they do process-wise and how they develop. The best in breed strategy allows you to pick multiple systems and then implement a really strong data warehouse strategy where you're pulling that data down and pulling out the key insights that you need. We're kind of right there with the end of the hour, though. I'm sure everybody's got another meeting that they need to hop into, so I'll put Jordan and I's contact information up. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions. Happy to be asked to join today. Excited to participate in this. Even though I'm not local to North Carolina, it's always got a little piece in my heart out there. So I'm happy to be in the state at any time, and excited to be there just in a couple of weeks in Raleigh to execute.
I was about to say, you say you're not local, but you were here in Charlotte a couple weeks ago and going to be in Raleigh in a couple more weeks. So local enough, I think.
Local enough, local by request, right?
Thank you, Jordan and Mitchell. We greatly appreciate it. Good information. So thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for administering hosting the Zoom. We appreciate it. And if you all could take a minute to complete the webinar survey, it should be in the link in the chat if it's not already there. Again, these webinars are free to our members. So if you're wanting to be a member, you can also find that in the chat as well. And look forward to a wraparound email with the recording. And just FYI, for those of you that are interested in the Center's Nonprofit Management Institute, registration is now open, and it's a 6-week nonprofit management course. And it's very helpful for those of you who are wanting some information on the proper techniques of principles and practices of running a nonprofit. So with that being said, thank you again, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you.